And a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to the Turning Point for ITN Sri Lanka. Our guest today is going to talk to us about the potential impact on Sri Lanka by world events that are happening outside the country, especially as Sri Lanka moves towards a trading economy that is looking outward and rather than inward. And there can be very many implications, direct, indirect, and so on, and which will test the mettle of all our politicians from whichever hue they are. Our guest today is shall we say, he's a diplomatic historian. He's also the executive director at the Regional Center for Strategic Studies, and he's no stranger to the world of diplomacy. Is Dr. George Cook, PhD. Good evening to you, George, and welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you. And like I said, I'd like to ask you, Sri Lanka is coming out of this economic couple of years of annus horribilis, and so we are pretty challenged. And we are dependent on the outside in terms of trade and everything else. So with the events that's happening in, let's say, in the Middle East, in the Ukraine, Bangladesh, and so on, what potential impact for Sri Lanka, given that, you know, say the Middle East is a big revenue earner in terms of our migrant workers, our trade, tea, big export market out there, and our historical links to the Middle East as well. What impacts may there will be?
For us, let's start from this point. When we talk about our relationship with West Asia, I prefer to refer to that region as West Asia, especially sitting in South Asia. When we look at those countries, you mentioned the historic connectivity, and this is where we go back decades. We've had connections with them when it comes to non-alignment, we've had connections to them when it comes to trade, but more recently we have a very tangible connection, and that is the migrant community. The Sri Lankans who have gone over there, who are working so very hard, who are earning so very much and sending loads back home. And that is where we are actually enjoying life to a large extent over here because of this money that is coming back, the remittances that are being sent back. Any kind of instability in that part of the world is going to impact us. Unfortunately for us, sitting in Colombo, sitting in Sri Lanka, we are focused very much on what is happening within the country. And to be fair by us, we have a lot happening on a daily basis. On an hourly basis, sometimes we have new developments and new issues that we are trying to grapple with. But when we look at the bigger picture, something might be happening out there which we might not regard, we might not take into consideration, but the ramifications in the long term are massive. We talk about what's going on between Russia and Ukraine, but that's not on the news every day. Does it mean it's over? Does it mean there's no battle going on? It's not the case. It's the media that we rely on. If the media tells us that something is happening, we then are attuned to what is happening globally. Otherwise, we tend to switch off and focus very much on what is domestic. But if we look at the latest developments coming out of Gaza, Israel, the developments that are taking place there, the attacks that are taking place, this is going to continue to frustrate relations for those countries. And many of them are being extremely cautious, extremely careful in how they deal with Israel and how they deal with Gaza, how they deal with Palestine. And they are very concerned about their economies. They are very concerned about their future. They are very concerned about how they are on a trajectory. Take a country like Saudi Arabia. They are on a trajectory to really soar in the years ahead. They do not want anything inhibiting their progress. And they are so concerned. Their potential for strategizing is immense, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're really on an amazing tangent, all of those countries, which have targeted goals, and they're going all out to get them. Now, what we need to learn from those experiences is that despite problems in their immediate neighborhood, this is not far away, immediate neighborhood, they're still managing to find ways to overcome those challenges. At the same time, what should we be doing? We should be very concerned. If it spills over, if by some chance it expands in the weeks, in the months ahead, we're going to have lots of Sri Lankans having to return home. We're going to have them losing their jobs, at least temporarily. Now, how are we going to deal with that? We're going to have a drop in remittances at that point, if that happens. Hopefully, we will not go to that stage. But we must always be ready for every scenario, irrespective of
it really is our self-interest.
Absolutely, because it is absolutely in our interest to know what could happen.
Yeah.
It's not a case of waiting until a situation arises and then trying to find ways and means to deal with it. We must have plan A, plan B, a whole number of plans in place so that if and when there is a development, we are ready to deal with it at that stage. And sometimes we wonder whether we only make plans on a daily basis or weekly basis. When there is a development, we will respond. That is not the way it should be done. Strategizing is the way forward.
So we must be ready. We
Absolutely,
must be prepared.
absolutely. I'll give you an example from last year. India declared it the year of millet.
Right.
Now, why millet? Millet is a certain grain that they use in India, but India focused, the government had a nationwide drive in order to boost the use of millet amongst the population, because they realized if there is a drop in the wheat sales, what are they going to do? They have to find food for 1+ billion people. How are they going to manage that? But this is foresight. This is looking ahead and preparing people for eventualities. It's not suddenly telling them, you can't eat this today, you have to eat this from tomorrow. People are not going to change overnight. You have to do it gradually. And that was a key lesson when it comes to food security, being very conscious of the fact that there could be a drop in wheat production. Because of what is happening in Russia and Ukraine, which supplies a large amount of wheat to the world market. As that intensifies, as that situation grows, we're going to see a depletion of stocks that are being used right now by using buffer stocks at the moment. So what happens when that runs out? Thankfully, those countries have planned well in advance, and there is still a sufficient amount that is available. But it's not going to be there forever. And growing at the moment is not the main focus in those two countries. It might be the case in Russia, but Ukraine is facing a very different situation. So this is where we have to be conscious. The lessons that we have to learn from these countries of looking ahead and strategizing. At the moment, we might think Israel-Palestine has no impact on us. Of course it does. Ukraine-Russia has no impact on us. Of course it does. We've got to be ready. We've got to look long term and not just look at things that are happening right in front of us only.
Now, India is always very concerned, as any country is, but India especially very concerned about other relationships, let's say with Sri Lanka and China. How does Sri Lanka manage to keep India happy and so that India doesn't get too colour-bellified?
We must never forget that India is our immediate neighbour. India is a growing world power. India is a country that we have trifled with in the past, and we have learnt very bad mistakes from our mistakes. Hopefully we have learnt from them. We have seen relations soaring and we have seen them souring. It depends on the time period and those in leadership. But this is where India is also a country that is recognized globally for its position, for its potential, and people are beginning to realize that India has now evolved from being simply a non-aligned country into a country which is on its own. It can stand on its own. It's not a country that needs to take side A or side B in order to survive. Other countries are now coming to India. They're turning to India. The best example is when we go back to Prime Minister Modi's election, his first election, back in 2014. We remember before that he was a chief minister. And when he was a chief minister, he was denied an American visa.
Yes, indeed.
Because of certain developments in his state. And the moment he was elected prime minister, you would think that relations with America would be rather sour. They were not. His first Republic Day, the special guest was Barack Obama. Now that's diplomacy on the side of the Indians and the Americans. Those are lessons that we have to learn. If they went to harbor grudges from the past and try to continue with those in the future, relations would have been in tatters between those two countries. They didn't do that. India looked beyond the development that had taken place regarding their prime minister. The Americans realized they had to work with India And Barack Obama accepted the invitation, and he was special guest at Narendra Modi's first Republic Day.
And as a Sri Lankan, I sort of a little bit miffed at the time that Barack Obama wasn't able or wasn't persuaded to come to Sri Lanka, which was, you know, about half an hour or an hour flying time away. What do you think? Was there, is that Sri Lanka doesn't matter, or was it something else? I mean, this is some diplomatic insight you may be able to give me.
This is where Sri Lanka is not a strategic state. It is a peripheral state. When the Americans look at South Asia, they obviously look at India, and because of India, they look at Pakistan as well. Sri Lanka is growing in relevance for them, and the growth is not because of Sri Lanka, but because of the attention Sri Lanka gets from certain other countries.
Right. Like China.
Like China. So that is where Sri Lanka gets attention.
Right.
You remember under President Trump, his vice president talked about Hambantota.
Yeah.
They mentioned it. They brought it up, and it had not been talked about or discussed earlier. So that was because there was Chinese involvement. So this is where we have to understand sometimes the attention we get is not because of us, it's because of the attention we get from others.
Right.
That attracts other attention from other quarters of the world. And at the end of the day, if we look at that particular opportunity that we missed in terms of having Obama visit us, the last time we had an American vice president was back in 1953 when Richard Nixon came here.
Oh.
We have not had anyone more senior than him coming to this country ever. We have never had an American president coming. We've had former presidents coming, but never a sitting president. So the most senior American official to have visited us was Richard Nixon under Eisenhower, when Eisenhower was president, when he came in 53. Now, why did Nixon undertake that visit? In 52, we had signed the Rubberized Pact. There was concern in Washington that Ceylon was drifting towards China, was drifting towards communism. And there was concern at that point. And they thought because of the Rubberized Pact, there might be increased interest in ideology. Of course, that was not the case. We know when Richard Nixon visited, Sir John Kotalawala was Prime Minister. And Sir John, from his title itself, you understand, was anti-communist, and he was anti-communist to the core.
Indeed.
And he was not going to allow that to happen, but the Americans were concerned.
And thank you for that wonderful explanation, Dr. George Cook. This is the turning point. We're going to have a short break. We'll be back once again after these messages with Dr. George Cook, diplomatic historian.
Best ever sunlight රුපියල් 70කින් මිලාඩු කළා. දැන් රුපියල් 380ක් පමණයි.
Prima Kotomi fun තමයි.
ගුණ පරපුරක සහතිකය. Anchor. ඔයා ෆියුචර් රෙඩි වෙන්න ඕන. ඒ වෙනුවෙන් මම හැමදාමත් ඔයත් එක්ක. අවුරුදු 6ත් 11ත් අතර දරුවන් සඳහා වැදගත් පෝෂ්‍ය පදාර්ථ 24ක් අඩංගු සස්ට්‍රජන් ජූනියර්.
ද්විත්ව ආරක්ෂාවක් දෙන නව ක්ලෝගාඩ් නැචරල් සෝල්ට්.
නව best ever sunlight. පෙරටත් වඩා සුවඳක් සමගින් සුපිරි සේදුමක්.
ෆෙම්ස් ඇය ගැනන ඇය වැසහනය. ට්‍රයිටෙක් සහ කොටන් වර්ග දෙකම ඉහළ ප්‍රමිතියට දැන් දැරිය හැකි මිලකට. ඇය එක්ක ඇගේ ඇයවැය ප්‍රශ්න ඉවරයි.
වීවා එකතුණු උකුතේ එකක
රස උපරිමයි.
කමුද මචං ප්‍රීමා කොත්තුමි ෆන් තමයි.
ලක්ස් කියන්නේ සබන් ගැටයක් විතරක් නෙවෙයි. සමට සත්කාරයක්. නව ලක්ස්.
බුද්ධිමත් ඇගේ තීරණය ප්‍රීමා ස්ටෙලා. අපි හැමෝම කැමති.
සසිරි දැන් තෑගි සුපිරි. වෙළඳපොලේ වැඩිම දෙලක්ෂපතියන් බිහි කරන ලොතරැයිය සසිරි. අංක 3ක් ගලපා ලේසියෙන්ම දිනන්න. සසිරි රට දිනවන වාසනාව. ජීවිතයම එළිය කරන සංවර්ධන ලොතරැයිය.
Introducing Prima Kottumi Korean Ramen. Let's fire it up. Mana Badena Prabodhamat Suaden. Obe Samata Susinidu Penakati Valadavatuno. Niacinamide Vitamin Satkaryak. Samada Prabodhamat Samaka Adaraniya Sada. Nava Riksona Saban.
කැමැත්ත තෝරන්න සූදානම්. හැටතුන් දහසක් සීරුවෙන්. නිවාඩු නොදුන්නොත් වැඩවරදී. හෙට අනිද්දාමෙන තීරණයන්. මාලදිවයිනේ පිහිටට අසල්වැසියා. දෙසදස් පොත් රසක් සමගින් හමුවමු සවස 6යි අපගේ ප්‍රධාන ප්‍රවෘත්ති විකාශයක් සමගින්.
ලැතිවර දිස්ත්‍රික්ක 22ක් මිනිත් 17කින් වූ ජනතා බලාපොරොත්තුවක් රට දිනවන අභියෝගී ඊළඟ මනාපය Presidential Election 2024 කවුරුද ජනතා බලාපොරොත්තුව සැප්තැම්බර් 21 පස්වරු 1 සිට live from ITN's HD studio unveiling Sri Lanka's future
cool වෙන්න tune වෙන්න van
And welcome back to the Turning Point for ITN Sri Lanka. My guest tonight is Dr. George Cook, PhD, diplomatic historian. And we're having this discussion about potential impact on Sri Lanka from world events. But one of these current events is happening in the Middle East, or West Asia as you call it, is the use of pagers, exploding walkie-talkies. What on earth's happening? Do you think this is safe? Do you think it's safe?
Absolutely not.
Oh my God.
This is where our devices are almost like tracking devices. We've seen these
So I should really have left this with Jonathan in the control room.
Absolutely. Everything that we are saying, everything that we are talking about is accessible to someone, somewhere, in some way or other.
Right.
Have you noticed, Faraz, when you are, let's say, talking to someone about shoes and the need to buy a pair of shoes, and you thought you need to go and get a pair of shoes. Have you noticed that on social media you will see shoe advertisements thereafter?
Isn't that an absolute, total, disgusting invasion of privacy?
Absolutely. So in the past, we've watched these old movies where we've seen people being let out on parole with a tracking device around their ankle, so that they can only go a certain distance. We now carry voluntarily tracking devices that would know that both of us are in this room at this very time in this part of the country, simply because of the devices that we carry. And this is where technology is really racing ahead. The incident you mentioned about pagers, which is very fresh right now in Lebanon, what has happened, where we've had these explosions taking place, about 12 have died, hundreds have been injured in it. It said that a message came through where you had to cancel it out. So obviously you hold it up to look at it. Some people had it explode in their pockets, but some people would hold it up to look at it. And then what's the first thing that happens? It explodes and it damages your eyesight, your face. It can, and it can even kill you, as has been the case with some people. And the interesting point is, this is happening a day after President Biden sent a special envoy, Amos Hochstein, to Israel, expressing concern about Lebanon not to let Lebanon ignite, not to allow things to worsen there, because it's going to really deplete the efforts that are being made in order to come to some kind of normalcy, if normalcy is ever going to be possible in that part of the world ever again, but also try to reduce the tension. The anxiety has to go down, because the more the tension increases, we're inching closer and closer to all-out war. And we know that these countries possess very lethal weapons. And once they start using them, what's the stopping point? When 1 million die? When 2 million die? What is going to be the point at which we're going to take a step back? This is where caution is needed on all sides. And unfortunately, the latest incident has only added to the tension, added to the anxiety, and it's going to keep on escalating. And this is where, going back to your first question, we have to be really vigilant about what is happening in that part of the world, because it doesn't look like we're going to see reconciliation of differences or an ending, at least a ceasefire, at least inching towards that. We're not going to see a resolution, but at least a ceasefire at this stage, where we understand, and when I say we, those sides that are involved, the key stakeholders, are very conscious of the impact they're having on people. People are dying, people are suffering, people are being blown up.
George, you know, 7-8 months ago, or thereabouts, the statistic was that a child was dying every 6 seconds. And even that stark statistic didn't move that superpower called the United States of America to force the Israelis to stop. We all know that it's just only on paper that they say, well, we can't really, it's up to them. That's all rubbish.
It's most unfortunately also an election year in the United States.
Yes.
And who is paying for it?
The children of Gaza.
Absolutely.
It is, you know, I'm sorry to draw this analogy, but it's like in the studio we have wall-to-wall carpeting. Over there, it was almost wall-to-wall dead children killed in the hospitals, killed outside their homes, some clutching their teddies. And these images would probably in the years to come start winning awards for the quality of the capture of the image. But what about that trauma, and what about the hate that automatically builds? For every one child who died, I am sure there will be 10 or more terrorists born or made in lieu of.
This is where we have not yet realized that, and that's an absolutely spot-on point that you made there. When people see their family members being tortured, when they see them dying in front of their eyes, that scars them for life. It's not something you're going to be able to tell them, let's overcome this, let's reconcile, let's put the past behind us. You can't do that. You must remember, if you walk down that road, they are down that road. Wherever you may take them, that road is always going to be in their minds. And the sad situation is, many countries out there, we talk about human rights, we talk about how we have various freedoms. But then you realize the value of a life in Beirut, the value of a life in Berlin, the value of a life somewhere else in the world, in Baghdad, for example, is so different. And this is where the international media plays a big role in what they highlight and what they don't highlight. You might have noticed there would be an incident where there would be someone, imagine on a bridge somewhere in Berlin, wielding a knife. There would be helicopters circulating, there would be drones with automatic footage, everything would be done. This would be covered second by second. But at the bottom you would have that tape running saying 34 killed in bomb blast in Baghdad. It's as though we're expecting that. We have been made immune to it. This is where we have to wake up from this slumber and realize that every life that is lost, unless through natural causes, is a life that should not have been lost. We have to really change that. This is where the narrative has to change. We have to start becoming conscious. We sometimes think, oh, it's not my problem. It's happening somewhere else, someone else's child. So we don't care. But if it happens to someone of ours, someone we know, then we wake up. But why
Which is
that?
what really happened in the United States, isn't it? Until 9/11 happened.
Exactly.
It appeared to be, to the United States at any way, that this terrorism was some problem somewhere else in the world.
It was a poverty-driven problem.
Yeah.
And then Osama bin Laden came and changed narrative completely.
Yeah.
Because he didn't come from an impoverished family.
No.
And
It's one of Saudi Arabia's most wealthiest families.
Exactly.
And a company that leads the way even to this day in building airports and so on out in
That
the
is
kingdom.
where countries out there woke up and realized terrorism is not just poverty-driven. There are other factors that have to be taken into consideration. It's not a problem of the developing world. It's not just some countries, as they would label them, poor countries out there. When you label a country poor, poor in what? Very rich in natural resources might be poor financially. Countries that are very rich when it comes to industrialization are very poor when it comes to natural resources. So we all have our strengths. It's just that we don't know how to take advantage of our strengths. This is what has happened. When we talk about the non-aligned movement, we go back to the 60s and 70s for us, what we notice is that countries that were considered to be, as you use the term at that time, third world, we don't use it anymore, but that's what we were called, we had a lot, but we were mentally called what we were, and now we use the term developing. So we remained developing and we remain developing to date. Why is that? We've also had issues in-house in our countries that we've not been able to rectify. But it does not mean that we should be sitting back and very complacently thinking we're always going to be in this position. We're not going to climb that power ladder. We have to challenge it. We have to question it. We have to debate it. We have to discuss it. We have to bring it up. It has to be highlighted that all countries and all people, they're all humans. Whether it's a human in Gaza, whether it's a human in Georgia, whether it's a human in Germany or anywhere else in the world, they're all humans. And that is a key factor that we have to drive home all the time.
As we come to the last minute of this, I just want to say that it struck me as incredibly ironic that a race that had been targeted and they were trying to wipe them out in the Holocaust are inflicting similar pain and agony on yet another race.
It's because we forget. We forget very easily.
The world, actually I used to say that Sri Lankans are myopic. It looks like to me now
the
world is myopic. Dr. George Cook, thank you very much for being on the Turning Point. Much appreciated. And that's the way it was on the Turning Point tonight for ITN Sri Lanka. Take care and bless you all.